Uh, I will share a little bit about Rosh Hashanah and some of my inspiration that I always try to include for myself, just the right mindset. And of course, I welcome many, many questions. I am going to spotlight me, but I do know that I'm only doing that so others can see me well. You might appreciate the gallery view on this one, see others as well for their questions. So what I wanted to talk about really is the first thing is I'm going to cut to the chase on a couple things, and then I'll come back and give some better explanations. But Rosh Hashanah this year, of course, is very, very different in the sense of how so many of us are celebrating it. And I'm not just talking about the Rosh Hashanah dinner, but I'm talking about even the service, right? So you might not be with friends, you might not be with family, but the beautiful thing is that you can actually celebrate Rosh Hashanah in a meaningful way, and maybe you won't be with friends, but you can. It's really up to each one of us how we make that very meaningful. So what I want to share is that the most important thing of Rosh Hashanah, before we talk about if others can or cannot do this, but the most important thing is really the mitzvah of listening to the shofar. And I say that knowing that many people are not comfortable going to a service, and therefore, what should you do? So I think there's two things that every single one of us must remember, and that is according to the Torah, according to Judaism, whenever there is a debate of health or doing a mitzvah. So if you're on the fence, I want to be safe and healthy. On the other hand, I want to be at a service and listen to the shofar. What do? The answer is you always choose life over the mitzvah. There's a very famous line in the Torah. It's a verse that says you should live by these commandments. The inference being, and I've shared this before Pesach, I know I've shared this a couple of times, but the most important thing to take from that verse is don't die by these commandments, live by these commandments. So with that knowledge, although I'm going to share with you right now that the most important thing of Rosh Hashanah is to listen to the shofar, and everything else is commentary. Dipping an apple in honey is commentary. Going to a service is commentary. If I was going to be able to do one mitzvah, I would be listening to the shofar. I will tell you that if it presents yourself with a health risk, then you choose your health over shofar. With that being said, and again, like I did say honestly, I'm going to jump to the chase on just this one thing so that everyone can appreciate this. With that being said, if you are able to listen to the shofar, it cannot have anything that would channel its sound, and therefore we don't hear the unadulterated and we miss the raw sound of the shofar. And I'll go backwards, of course, in our discussion, talk about why we listen to a shofar. But while we're on the subject, how should you listen to the shofar? First of all, on Friday and Saturday, we don't listen to the shofar. So if for whatever reason you're at a service and they're blowing the shofar on Shabbat, it has been millennia that our rabbis have taught we don't blow the shofar on Shabbat. So fulfilling the mitzvah this year is only on Sunday. Now, even on Sunday, fulfilling the mitzvah would not be able to be done through Zoom or through a recording. In fact, you can't even put a mask on the shofar edge. Let's say you were worried about putting the air of my breath. Let's say I was blowing the shofar. My breath goes on this side. It comes out on this side. And we're worried these days about the air that we're breathing. So you would assume maybe I should cover this end and blow the shofar, put a mask on here so it doesn't really go into the air. That is changing the sound of the shofar. So it wouldn't be allowed either. So it poses a lot of health questions and Jewish questions. But what I want to share, and this is the end of my little intro, and I know I jumped right into it, but if you are going to attempt to listen to the shofar and you wanted it to be in a healthy way, in a safe way, in Arizona, if you're listening to this because you're in New York or another city, I know I have Woodstock on here, then you should find a shofar blowing ceremony that's outdoors. And there are a lot of locations that are doing that. I'm just going to tell you in Phoenix and Arizona alone, I compiled a list because I'm going to put it in one of our emails. I'm just going to read through the list. Phoenix has, North Phoenix has, Fountain Hills has, Mesa has, Glendale has, South Phoenix has, Sedona has, Scottsdale has, Chandler, Prescott, Paradise Valley, Gilbert, Goodyear, Sierra Vista, Anthem, Oro Valley, Flagstaff, Tucson, Tempe. So really, there are many places that you can find that will give you that opportunity to listen to the shofar. But again, I do want to also stress, do not be depressed if this year you feel like you can't get it in person, and therefore you feel like you're lacking something in your Rosh Hashanah. You're not. Rosh Hashanah is not about the shofar as much as it is about the shofar. So what I want to jump into is just a little bit about the shofar, but then I want to talk about Rosh Hashanah. I always love this story. I share it often. I've heard it many times as a child, and I feel like I started to appreciate it a little bit more as I became an adult. And that was, as a child, I always looked forward to the shofar blowing. Everyone looks forward to it. When's it happening in the service? And people wait for that, and then they might leave the service immediately right afterwards. So as a child, this was always something that we looked forward to. As I got older, I learned, okay, the shofar is very integral. It's definitely biblical. But why do we listen to the shofar? So here is a story that I always love, and I'll share it. Maybe you've heard it from me, maybe you have not. But this is the way, one of the stories that I think emphasizes even more so this year what the shofar does, but what it does not do. And I want to focus down on what it does not do, because for all of us who might not be listening to a shofar in person, we should remember this second part. So the story is that a young boy has relatives in the large city. He comes from a little village. And as you and I know, in the olden days, how did they fight a fire? And fires were quite dangerous, because we know that with any fire, an entire village could burn down. We don't have to look further than Chicago and the Great Fire that they had as a more recent event. But with this knowledge of how dangerous fires were, it really took a village to fight a fire. They would create a line of people, buckets were being passed because water wasn't running. So you had to bring it from the well. People were running and throwing it on the flames. This young child is in a larger city, and in the middle of the day, out of the blue, he hears this huge horn. So he asks his relatives, he says, tell me, what is going on? What is this sound? So they tell him, oh, there's a fire. So what's the horn? He says, that's how we fight fires here. Someone climbs on the tower, they blow a horn, and they fight the fire, and the fire goes out. Obviously not really understanding the concept. He is so excited about this. In his city, in his little town, fires take everyone's efforts. So he comes back to his town, he finds out what horn they have, what type of a tower they have. He convinces the city elders to install this tower and buy this horn. And he is so excited for the first fire. He's waiting for a fire in his town. Finally, there's a fire. He runs up the tower with his horn, and he begins to blow the horn. And everyone in the town is excited. They want to see the fire go out. I mean, it works in the big city. And of course, this kid missed the entire concept. The fire needs to be fought with water. The horn is to wake people up to go fight the fire. It's an alarm. And I share this story because I think this message this year is even more important than any other year. The shofar, all it does is it's a call to action. But in the end of the day, it's up to every single one of us to actually go and do that action. It's within our actions that we can make Rosh Hashanah important and meaningful. The shofar is just a wake-up call. So I share that because, again, if you can listen to a shofar, 100% the best way to go about Rosh Hashanah, because you'll be fulfilling a biblical mitzvah. But if you can't, because you haven't found a safe way, or you just don't have the mechanism to get to a place that has it, do not be discouraged. Remember that the same God that asked you to go and listen to the shofar told you that in this very situation, do what is safest for you. Do what is right for your health. Do what is most important to living another year and celebrating another Rosh Hashanah, where you'll be able to listen to the shofar in person. So again, with that in mind, I want to now back up and talk about Rosh Hashanah a bit, and then hopefully some questions from you, or maybe some more insight, because I always love learning about Rosh Hashanah and how it's meaningful to you, and take some inspiration for myself. But what I will start is Rosh Hashanah. I think the most important thing that many people always take away from the holiday is it's a day of repentance. And it becomes this, in my opinion, to many people, it becomes a very depressing type of a day, or a depressing type of 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, where we focus on all the bad that we did, right? We think about where we went wrong, who we insulted, and we go around and we ask people for forgiveness. And yes, that's part of the holiday, and I will share why just in a moment. But that's not the focus of the holiday, because that's a misinterpretation of a word. So I guess the first question is, how did Rosh Hashanah become this day of, first of all, the new year, but also a day of asking God for forgiveness? The answer is, I think, quite revealing. The world was not created on Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the day that Adam and Eve were created. So 6 days prior, in fact, Monday on the Jewish calendar, was the first day of creation. So why are we celebrating the Jewish New Year on day number 6 of creation? Why aren't we celebrating the Jewish New Year on day number 1 of creation? And the answer to that is also quite telling. The answer is because God created Adam and Eve. The entire purpose of creation was for mankind. We had someone on recently. His name was David Sachs, if anyone here remembers him, the writer for The Simpsons. And instead of sharing a story, he actually taught. And one of the things that he always shares, I started following him a little bit, and I always like this answer that he gives. We complain, why isn't the world good? Why do we see evil? Why do I see problems? And because of that, some of us are discouraged. Some of us question, is there even a God? And his answer always is the same, and I love his answer. His answer always is God created the world in a way that we should finish it, that we should complete it. So when you see problems, it's because God did not create it perfect. It's our role in this world to make the world better. And that role was only going to be achieved by God creating Adam and Eve, and of course, the progeny, us, who eventually are born, to continue this mission to make the world better. So Rosh Hashanah's real focus is that God created the world for Adam and Eve and for every single human being. Adam and Eve were not Jewish. I stress that on purpose, to make this world better. It's not a Jewish mission. It's a world mission for all mankind. We all play different roles, but it is one big purpose that we play together to make this world a better place. So when we celebrate Rosh Hashanah on the day that Adam and Eve were created, not on the day that God created the world, we're actually making a very big point. And that is that we matter, that every single one of us matters, that God needs every single one of us individually to make this world better. God needs our actions. And now the question is, okay, how do I do that? How do I make my world better? How do I not get stuck in all the negativity and focus on the positive? And that is where the Torah comes to play. And that is where we have 613 commandments. Of course, today, not all 613 are doable. But the idea is that this is where every single one of us plays our role in doing something, one thing, 2 things, 10 things, 100 things to make the world better. I always love this line. I share it ever since I've read it. And I'm sorry that I don't remember the rabbi who quotes this. But the quote was like this, that the way that we judge ourselves in Judaism is not by perfection, right? Our yardstick for success. How do I know if I'm successful? Most people, I'm not talking about in a Jewish conversation, but in general, we say, well, listen, if you did it perfectly, you were good. If you didn't, there is more to be desired. Well, in Judaism, here is the fascinating thing. In Judaism, if you do something more than before, if you try your efforts, that is how God measures success. Not on, did I complete it, but did I work hard, honestly, and achieve something? Do something. Am I better than last year? Am I better than yesterday? Am I trying to grow? That is how we are successful. So in Judaism, every single mitzvah is merited and judged on its own. If I do something today, that is beautiful. It's not all or nothing. So let's say many of us walk away with this hypocritical feeling. Well, I'm not always keeping Shabbat, or I'm not keeping Shabbat completely. So why keep it at all? That's not the Jewish perspective. The Jewish perspective is, I'm lighting candles this Shabbat, or I'm making Kiddush this Shabbat, or I'm having a Shabbat dinner this Shabbat. Let's focus on that, because God appreciates that. God appreciates that single action. Next week, that's another opportunity. And really, this is, I come back now to, what does it mean to repent in Judaism? What is this idea that we have mitzvot, we have sins, we want to fix it? Many of us look at that as the punishment side of it. If you didn't do it, God's going to do X, Y, and Z. Like I always share, a friend of ours locally who told me that the first time she did laundry on Shabbos, she had a fire in her house, and it was God's way of punishing her. And I looked at her and I said, you are crazy. God does not work that way. That's just you connecting dots that are not connected. You had a fire in your house because you did not clean the lint in your dryer. That's why. But the idea is that people look at this. When I do a mitzvah, I get the reward. When I do a sin, or I do not do the right thing, I get the punishment. That's not how we look at it. Well, we have to look at it the Jewish way, is how awesome of an opportunity to connect to God through every opportunity that we have within the mitzvot. So today, if I davened, or I did a mitzvah, I put charity in a pushka, in a charity box. I did a mitzvah. I was able to connect to God through that mitzvah. When I don't seize those opportunities, there isn't a punishment coming my way. It was a missed opportunity. We had an opportunity to connect to God. What better and more awesome opportunity to be engaged with God? God created these ways that we can connect. Us, the finite creation, with the infinite God. What better way and what better opportunity? So when we miss those opportunities, we should feel it. It should feel bad, but not bad in the sense that we sinned. We missed an opportunity. So Rosh Hashana is this beautiful thing, teshuvah, which many people always translate as repentance, right? The theme of the holiday is teshuvah, which means repentance in the English translation, tefillah, which we always translate as prayer, and tzedakah, which we translate as charity. In the prayers, we always say these three things will get rid of any negative decree that was put upon us for the upcoming year. Because Rosh Hashanah is a day of judgment. God judges all of us, how our year will be. There's a very somber part to that. But again, it's all about how we focus on it. Do I focus on it that God is judging me, or do I focus on it that I have an opportunity to connect to God? And teshuvah, and this is where I will give the translation, the proper translation. Teshuvah actually comes from a Hebrew word, which is shuv, to return. The emphasis of teshuvah is to become close to God. It's not to focus on what we did wrong. It's to focus on our connection that we automatically have because we are created by God in God's image. So when we focus on that, then we can actually connect to God in a more meaningful way. We focus on these opportunities. So Rosh Hashanah is this day that I don't focus on all the negativity. I focus on this opportunity to connect to God. Make the day meaningful. How do you make Rosh Hashanah meaningful? The way I always look at it, through these types of teachings and through this lens, is it is an awesome opportunity to connect to God. It's a day that you and I, in our own way, connect to God and reconnect to God. So when we talk about Rosh Hashanah, what is Rosh Hashanah? Well, Rosh Hashanah, when you look at it through the Kabbalistic lens, which gives us a lot of insight into the holiday, it is a day that God connects to us. It's a renewal of our connection and God's connection to us and to the world. We crown God as our King. And if you look through the prayer service, this is exactly what you'll find. There are three different, I'm going to say, parts to the prayers when you start sort of analyzing what we're reading. you'll find that we have, number one, where we have the passages that are all about God being our king. What is a king to a king's citizens, or to a king's people and nation? It's their source of everything good. What is the second theme of the holiday? We have what's called zichronot, which is that we remind God of many good examples in our history of of our forefathers, of other leaders in our Jewish history that went beyond the call of duty to show God that they were connected and loved. So we remind God about this because we are looking for merits. We're looking for a very good year. So we remind God we are descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moses, and all the different people from our history that end up in the prayers. And the last section is the shofar. How do we remind God about all of these memories? How do we show God that he is our king? We do that through the shofar. And what is the shofar? The shofar is a very simple blast of a horn, right? We have different ways of blowing the shofar. There is a tekiah, there is a shavarim, and there is a teruah, 3 different sounds. But these sounds are meant to just stir within us an emotion, a feeling, to stir our hearts to want to become closer to God. And that feeling will inspire us to want to do the right thing for the upcoming year, to be good people, to be good in the Jewish sense as well, and have a good year, connect to God in a spiritual sense. And when we do that, it is a given that God reciprocates in kind with blessings for a good year, a healthy year, a happy year. And this is, I think, if I were to sort of encapsulate Rosh Hashana in a very short presentation, it would be this, that God chose us to live in this world, to partner with God, to make this world better. And this is the day that we sort of remind ourselves and rejuvenate ourselves and reconnect with God to do this. What amazing opportunity. It's an awesome responsibility, but an awesome opportunity. And when we think of Rosh Hashanah that way, Rosh Hashanah is awe-inspiring in a positive sense. It is not a negative inducing depression because I didn't do whatever X, Y, and Z last year, but rather it's, I have an opportunity to connect. Let's connect. And therefore I share this for those of us who are not going to a service in person, who are not listening to the shofar in person. Rosh Hashanah can still be done correctly. To use another story, it's a parable that I heard. And I've heard that it's from the Baal Shem Tov, but I've never read it inside to confirm that. But I think the parable still speaks for itself. So the story is that the animals have the king of the wildlife, as we know, as the lion. Well, the animals insult the lion, and they now need to ask for forgiveness. The problem is no one wants to be the leader and sort of speak to the lion, the king of the jungle, on behalf of everyone else. So finally, the fox says, you know what? I have a lot of jokes, and let's walk to the lion's den. I'll share my 300 jokes, and we'll put the lion in a good mood, and he'll for sure forgive us. So they begin to walk. In the middle, the fox pauses and says, you know what? I forgot 100 of my jokes. What should we do? So a couple of the animals that are in this entourage start crying. What are we going to do? So finally, the smart bear speaks up and says, oh, don't worry about it. You have 200 jokes. Your jokes are amazing. I'm not worried. With your 200, you can affect that the lion, the king, is going to be in a good mood. So they continue to walk. And he pauses again, the fox, and says, I'm sorry. I forgot another 100. And again, the same story. Everyone's crying. And finally, another animal speaks up and says, don't worry about it. You have 100 jokes left. It's good enough for the king. They finally get to the lion's den. They're inside in front of the king. And what happens? He turns to all of his fellow animals and he says, I forgot the last 100. And now they want to kill him. He said, you brought us here. We're standing in front of the king and we don't have any jokes. We have nothing to say. So the fox turns to him and says, are you stupid? I brought you here. Now you do something. And I took this parable. I've actually shared it in services before, that each one of his 100 jokes represents another thing that goes on in the service. First, you have the rabbi, right? We come to services and we want to be inspired by the rabbi's sermon and the rabbi's jokes and whatever else. But the rabbi is only a tool. Then you have the cantor. We come to services, we want to hear beautiful melodies, we want to hear beautiful songs, things that inspire us. But again, the cantor is only a tool. And then you have the shofar. Like we mentioned, the shofar is just a tool. These are things that are meant to inspire us. But in the end of the day, it's exactly like the fox said. I brought you here. Now you do something. I brought you into the king's chamber. Now you do something. Rosh Hashana is this day that God is close to us. We are in God's palace, in his chambers. It's an opportunity now on us to seize that moment and connect in our own way. Well, does that mean that I do it exactly like the book says? In the sense of I'm reading all the prayers in the Machzor? If you do, great. But the idea is on our own, we have to come to something within ourselves and say, I want to do better. I want to connect in this way, maybe take upon a mitzvah for the year. I've seen different shuls that on Yom Kippur by Ne'ilah, what they do is they do a mitzvah auction. And what that means is they get people to take a mitzvah and they put those mitzvah notes, those pledges, into the ark where all the Torahs are and say, this is my mitzvah for the year. This is my pledge to be close to God through this mitzvah. And it's not that two people can't choose the same. People might choose the same one. It could be when you eat out. I'm just sharing an example. It's not meant to share. You don't have to take this. But kosher is not necessarily easy. But kosher is easier than you think. So it might be that when I'm in my home, I will only use kosher foods, right? That doesn't mean your dishes are kosher. It doesn't mean your kitchen became kosher. It's a step, right? When I buy meat, it's going to be kosher meat. Or when I buy fish, it's going to be kosher fish. These are small things. But like we mentioned, God does not look at us and decide, oh, you didn't do everything, so nothing to do with you. No, God appreciates the small actions. God appreciates every single action that we do and doesn't judge us on the big picture, but on our efforts. Am I doing something? There's an age-old teaching that says if you're not moving forward, right? If you're comfortable with your status quo, then you're actually moving backwards. And I think that's how I look at this, that, am I doing something? This isn't about, am I doing it all? Am I doing something to move forward, to show that I want to connect to God, to show that this trust that God put within each and every single one of us, I am appreciating it and doing something about it. That is how I look at the high holiday season. And everything else is commentary. So I'm just going to quickly go through some of the traditions that we all have. But again, those are all, like I think like the fox story. These are things that give us an inspiration, but they are not Rosh Hashana. Rosh Hashana is something that we have to do on our own, more than show up at services and more than listening to a shofar, but to pledge on our own, to be close to God, to want to connect to God. And how do we do that? Through the mitzvot that we are given. So with that in mind, I will share that the idea of Rosh Hashana, like we said, is about connection. So we find in some of our traditions that we have for Rosh Hashana, some of them are celebration, some of them are biblical. For example, we make a holiday meal, right? And a holiday meal, you might envision it with roast and brisket and everything else. But really, a holiday meal is that you sat down and you said, this meal is special. It's for Rosh Hashanah. It is a way of enjoying the holiday. Why do I have to enjoy the holiday through a meal? Well, again, like I said, a meal could be anything. Just because this year your meal looks differently than other years, that does not mean you're not enjoying it through the meal. But the idea is that for every single holiday, there is a spiritual component, and then there is the physical component. If God says that you should celebrate and rejoice in a holiday, and I told you I'm going to stay in shul 24 hours straight because I want to spiritually enjoy the holiday, then you're ignoring your body. And God created us body and soul, a spiritual and a physical marriage. So when we celebrate and enjoy, it has to also be in the physical sense. And that is why we have a festive meal. Right? We sanctify the holiday with a kiddush. We dip an apple in honey. Why an apple in honey? And you know what I'm going to do is I would love to hear other thoughts on why an apple and honey. So if anyone wants to unmute their mic and share what they've learned or what they think is the reason for an apple and honey, please don't be shy. Ellen, go for it.
Sweetness.
Sweetness. So
For
great
sweet
answer.
New Year, for good New Year. And they're both sweet, honey and apple.
Yeah, so the short answer, and this is a great answer, the first answer that I will share, which is exactly what Ellen just shared, is that we celebrate with an apple and honey because apples are sweet, honey is sweet. So we chose two things to emphasize that we want a sweet year. And why sweet? Why do we always emphasize on sweetness? Because when we say that we want to have a sweet year, we mean that we want to have a good year, that no one has to explain to me that this is good, right? No one argues on the taste of sweetness. People argue all about taste, if something tastes good or not. But if something is sweet or not sweet, we all agree. So when we say have a sweet year, we're saying your year should be sweet. It should be full of good. So we do the apple and honey. But I do want to share, I guess, it is why an apple specifically? I always hear the answer from people, well, it's the fruit of the tree that Adam and Eve ate. And that is not correct. So if that was what you had thought it was, the apple was not the fruit that Adam and Eve ate. In fact, there are a number of opinions of what that fruit was, but none of those opinions ever say it's an apple. So I just put that out there. So why an apple? Like we said, apples are sweet, but I'll share something else. In the Song of Songs, which is a composition that King Solomon wrote. And in that Song of Songs, one of the things that he shares, it's really a love story. It's a parable of sorts of God's love for the Jewish people. And in it, King Solomon talks about the love that this husband and wife, and again, the husband and wife in the story are God and the Jewish people, the love that they had in the apple orchard. So we use a lot of symbolisms in Rosh Hashana to remind God of certain things. One of those symbolisms is the apple in this example, where we're saying, remember that love that you have for us. Bless us with a good year. Here is another symbolism. There are many different horns that can be used for the shofar. What I am holding is a ram's horn. There are many different types of horns that are kosher for the shofar. There are also plenty of different horns that are not kosher, but within the kosher horns, there are people who specifically want to use a ram's horn. Why a ram's horn? Because the ram's horn is a horn that reminds God of another story. What is that story?
Sacrifice of Isaac.
Yes, thank you. The binding of Isaac. So what's the story of the binding of Isaac? Why are we reminding God about that? Number one, it shows how far Adam went. Sorry, not Adam, Abraham went for his love for God. God said, slaughter your only son, the son I love. It wasn't his only son, but the son from him and Sarah. Slaughter him, bring him as an offering for me. And what does Abraham do? He does it. Right? Most of us would say, okay, that's a test I'm not going to try. Especially if he prayed so long to have a child. 100 years old. So what is the story there? As soon as Abraham is about to slaughter his son, an angel says, stop. God was just testing you. But the continuation of that story, and I always think of the irony, is Abraham's upset. He says, wait, I wanted to give something to you. I wanted to sacrifice something for you. So what does God do? God therefore says, or a miracle happens, I should say, and a ram is stuck in the actual bushes and it's stuck by the horns. So we use a ram's horn to remind God of this story, right? There are other symbolisms that we find. The round challah, as Ellen wrote into the chat. Why round? The circle of life. Are apples used because they're round? I don't know, because we could have used peaches. I mean, there are plenty of round fruits. But the idea being that we find the symbolisms to make things more meaningful, right? These were actions that us human beings, not the Torah and not the rabbis, added. It was ways that we made it more meaningful because we care about this and we want to connect to God in that more meaningful way. One of the other customs that we have for Rosh Hashana and the week before Yom Kippur is called Tashlich, and another one is called Kaparot or Kaparis, depending on how you grew up in pronunciation. So what is Tashlich and what is Kaparis? And like I mentioned earlier, both of these things are symbolisms. Yes, they are very traditional, but they are not doing what people think they do. When I go daven at a lake or a body of water with fish, I am not throwing my sins into the water, and therefore I don't need to do any repentance, if you want to use that fancy word. It's a symbolism. It's their actions that will hopefully arouse actions within us. By me going to the body of water and praying and casting my sins onto the water, it's meant to inspire me to change, to be better, to think differently, to cause positive reaction. And the same thing is with kaparis. For those of you who don't like kaparis because of all the complaints about animals, it doesn't have to be an animal. You can use charity. So that shouldn't be the reason why you don't like it. But the idea again is that by saying I am sort of passing off, I am asking God that he atones my sins through this action, whether it is a chicken, whether it is fish, whether it is coins or dollar bills to charity. The idea is I am giving tzedakah, because that chicken that you're always seeing in the pictures of people waving over their head, it's not thrown out afterwards, it's given to charity. This idea is what kapara says. It's supposed to give us meaning. You see a live animal that is going to be slaughtered to be given to charity, but being slaughtered, it's losing its life. In the end of the day, even though the Torah allows kosher slaughter, no one ignores the fact that we're actually killing an animal, right? So the idea is that the animal is part of this meaning and purpose in life, and we can talk about that for an entire discussion. But the idea is that this is to make me feel different, to make me want to come close to God, to make me want to have a good year, a better year. So this is the idea of Rosh Hashana that I would like to share. There's one thing that I want to share, and that is what I'll end with. There is a haftorah that is recited on Rosh Hashana. So the haftorah being the passages from the prophets and scriptures rather than the Torah reading. What is this haftorah that we read? We read two haftorahs on Rosh Hashana. And in fact, I'll share 2 points that I think are important. Rosh Hashana, many people say that in Israel, they celebrate it one day. In the diaspora, they celebrate it 2 days. That is false. The only holiday in the entire calendar of holidays that Israel celebrates 2 days like everyone else is Rosh Hashana. Why is that? The short answer is, why do we celebrate any holiday for 2 days? Will enlighten us on why Rosh Hashana is celebrated for 2 days in Israel as well. So the way the calendar was set up, the calendar was the very first mitzvah that the Jewish people were ever given. Before we were given the 10 Commandments, before we were given Passover, we were given the mitzvah of sanctifying the moon, which was how to celebrate every month. The way it worked was a new moon, two witnesses would witness this brand new moon, because if you are familiar with astrology, you'll understand that the moon disappears for a brief moment and reappears. That new moon is what symbolizes the new month for the Jewish people. Now, two witnesses have to see that. They come to the Jewish court in Jerusalem and they tell the court, the rabbis, we saw the new moon. They interrogate them. They make sure that they truly are not lying. If it comes to be that they're not lying, they will sanctify the new month. The problem is, in those days, they didn't have telephones. They didn't have internet, faxes. The only way to get the message out to the outlying cities and countries that had Jewish communities was through a system of messengers and signs. So they would immediately dispatch messengers on horseback and however else. But in addition to that, they had a system of flares. In Jerusalem, they'd go on a high mountain. The next city would be waiting because they knew around when is the new month, 30 days. They would see a flare. They would now wave a torch. The next mountain would wave a torch and they get the message out fairly quickly. The thing is, if you lived in the diaspora, you didn't get that message quick enough. So a holiday that began on the 14th of the month, for example, might not get the message until the 18th of the month. So on the 14th, you weren't sure, was the month a 29-day month or a 30-day month? And because of that, you always celebrated 2 days just in case. Just in case the holiday started on Tuesday, or just in case the holiday started on Wednesday. In Jerusalem, you didn't have that problem. And in Israel, you didn't have that problem. But you did have that problem for Rosh Hashana. Because Rosh Hashana begins on the first day of the month. So if the new moon happened at midnight, that means that at 7 o'clock, when it was sunset, I should have started Rosh Hashana. So immediately you'd start celebrating Rosh Hashana. It could be that the witnesses would come the following day, 26 hours later. And then you found out that you celebrated Rosh Hashana an extra day. So in Israel, Rosh Hashana was always celebrated 2 days. So throughout the world, Rosh Hashana is always a 2-day holiday. That's full circle, full stop. With that knowledge that Rosh Hashana is a 2-day holiday everywhere, I now come back to the Haftorah that I was talking about. Day number 1, we read the Haftorah. We read the story of the binding of Isaac, and there's a Haftorah. And then we have the Haftorah, what is called the story of Hannah. So Hannah was a woman who really wanted a child. Her child, who is eventually born to her, is the prophet Samuel. But Hannah really wants a child. And in her desire for a child, she goes to the tabernacle at that time and begins to pray outside. She's crying, she's swaying, she's mumbling. She's not mumbling, she's praying with her mouth. And what happens is a very famous passage. The priest tells her, you should not be drunk near the tabernacle. He thinks she's inebriated. She's clearly swaying and mumbling. And she says, no, I'm not drunk. I'm praying for a child. And of course, the priest is Eli at that time. He blesses her with a child. The child is a prophet who grows up actually in that tabernacle. He grows up in spirituality. Very famous prophet in our history. But what I want to share, and sorry about that noise, hold on. What I want to share is that with that story comes a very important teaching for every single one of us. And that is our prayers on Rosh Hashana. You might think, I want to be very spiritual. Well, Hannah's story teaches us 2 things. Number 1, vocalize your prayers. You should be able to hear them yourself, right? Eli, the priest, did not hear them, but he saw her mumbling. He saw that there was noise coming. We learned from that story that when you pray, you should actually verbalize it. So even if you're praying to yourself and you're reading from a prayer book, say the words that you can hear it yourself. So when you pray, vocalize those prayers. Number 2, and this is, I think, always important, our prayers for physical, mundane wants and desires are spiritual. Right? Chana is at the holiest place that exists. It is the tabernacle at that time. And she is praying for a child, something very personal. She's not praying for world peace and that God should be shining his countenance in a spiritual sense. She is praying for a physical need, something that's personal. And this is the same thing on Rosh Hashana when you pray. Don't just think that because it's such a spiritual day, you can't pray for physical needs, for things and desires of good health and good health for your family and prosperity for a friend and whatever we talk about. Rosh Hashanah is all about that. And the thing that I always learned from one of the rabbis in the 17th century was that when you are taken care of in the sense of our physical needs, our mundane needs, the spiritual aspirations that we have are much easier to attain and to achieve because we're not focused on all the troubles that we're going through. So this Rosh Hashanah, when you pray, you don't have to be embarrassed, just in case you were. I don't know if you were or not, but you don't have to be embarrassed if you're praying for something very personal. Rosh Hashanah is about that. Look at the prayer of Hannah. So to bring this point home, I'll share a story that I always loved. A rabbi, his name was Rabbi Levi Levertov. He's looking for someone to blow the shofar that year in the shul. So he goes around asking people, he says, what are you going to think about when you blow the shofar, if you do it? So the guy starts giving him all these spiritual thoughts, what we call in Hebrew kavanot, the different meditations that he's going to have, spiritual meditations. And he goes from one person to the next, and each one has this answer. Till he comes to one person, the guy says, I'm going to pray that my cow should give good milk, my sheep should have children, my crop should have a good crop. So the rabbi says, you're the guy I want to blow the shofar, right? Rosh Hashanah is very personal. It's very spiritual, but the spiritual component is also physical. They're symbiotic. They work together. And when you have a good year, and that is with good health, and your 401k or whatever investments you have are doing well, and you don't have all the other worries, you can focus on spiritual achievements and spiritual aspirations and growth. So with that, I'm going to take questions, but I want to just end off with wishing everyone here a very happy, healthy, sweet new year. And as I've always stolen this from someone else, but the blessing should be in a revealed sense. Just like I don't need anyone to convince me that honey is sweet. I don't want someone to say, oh, that's really God blessing you. You just don't see how. No, I want it to be a blessing that I see. And I don't need any explanations to how that's a good blessing. And that's what I wish for every one of us here. A blessing of good revealed blessings, where you don't need someone to start explaining why that was really a blessing. You just can't see it. So wishing everyone here a Shana Tova. And as we always say in Hebrew, a Ketiva, the Chatima Tova, we should be written and sealed for a good year, a healthy year, a happy year, and a prosperous year. I will take any questions or insights. I would love to hear more thoughts.
Rabbi, for the Tashlik service, are you supposed to bring bread so you can throw crumbs in? How does that work?
So very good question. This is, I've seen different traditions. Like I know that people do have a tradition to throw bread into the river or body of water for the fish. It's not the tradition I grew up with, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. What it means is that it's not my tradition. So we never grew up with that tradition. But my kids love feeding the fish and the ducks. So they might have some bread, but it's not something we brought because of a tradition.
But what is the Chabad tradition for observing it?
So we read the prayer and then that's it.
Okay, good. I don't have to bring bread then.
No, you don't. You don't. But you'll see there will be plenty of people with bread.
Okay.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Yes, hi. So full disclosure right away, I practice Reform Judaism. And I taught first and second grade for 25 years in Scottsdale. And one of my dear colleagues, Lori, is right there with us today too. So in my classroom for first and second grade, this was the sign: try your personal best. And that was an everyday occurrence. So that is always my philosophy with whatever I do. And I don't think I need, although I love Rosh Hashana, I don't think I need to have anything formal only on these couple of days or this week or these 10 days. I think every day we should be trying to do our best to do mitzvahs all year, every year.
So first of all, I love that point, and I'm going to share 2 points because there's no such thing as reform or conservative or orthodox ways of Judaism. So I always take note to that. I don't take offense to that. What I mean by that is all of the tags are they just divide us. And of course, we all want to follow the Torah. And so your point is very important. I think it's an important point that we have to do our very best, and how and why is not our job to judge. There's that's number one. But number two is I also agree with what you said. I don't know if we're reading it the same way, that our Judaism is not supposed to be Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur. So we are supposed to have this all year round. We just have an opportunity. I kind of look at it like when you go to sleep, you had a bad day, you wake up, it's a new day. There's a reset. Rosh Hashanah is kind of that opportunity. It's a clean slate. Some people, the more something is going wrong and they start going down in that direction, it bothers them and it makes them depressed. They don't want to do something because everything's going wrong anyways. So here is like, no, let's start over. Don't take that inspiration or lack thereof. Start over. So Rosh Hashanah is that opportunity. But like I always share, and I know others share this as well, we have so many people, you probably have friends that do this too. They start calling people, do you forgive me for anything I might have done over this past year? And when do they start making these phone calls? They do it around Rosh Hashanah because it's the holiday of forgiveness. And the fact is, you don't have to wait till Rosh Hashanah. If I've hurt your feelings, I should call you up the next day or as soon as you have sort of calmed down, where you'll be more accepting of my request for you to forgive me. Rosh Hashanah is an opportunity, but I shouldn't be waiting till September, till this month of Elul or Tishrei in the Hebrew calendar. So this is always important to remember that. To add to that, on the sense of forgiveness, many people, we're in a world that's very secular. We see other religions out there, and we talk about confessions, and Judaism doesn't have that. How do you ask God to forgive you in Judaism? There is a confession part, but it's to yourself, right? You tell yourself, I committed whatever it was. I plan on not doing it again. So I regret it, and I commit to doing better. That's forgiveness in Judaism. However, if I did it to someone else, it then is my obligation to ask that person for forgiveness. So unlike the other religions, God does not forgive me for a sin or for an act of not kindness, an insult or stealing or something that I have done from someone else.
Is better than not doing it.
I
Right?
recently
In that instance, I have to
That's how
go to the
it's supposed
person and ask them for forgiveness. I always am inspired by a story that I'll share. I visited prisons when I was studying to become a rabbi in the upper New York State. So some of the New York State prisons. We went to a prison and there was a guy, his last name was Goldstein, right? Very Jewish, who was in protective custody. He was a gang member. And he was on a path to becoming a better person. He truly was, which is why he was separated, because he was no longer in the gang. And he knew everything we came to talk to him about. We came on Purim. He knew the whole story. I'm like, how do you know this? I was curious. I'm like, how do you know all the details? Not just like the big story. He knew the details. So he shared with me that he has a chumash. He has a like an art scroll set, 5 books of Moses in his cell. And when he tells me this, his face changed. And he shared that the rabbi who visits him often taught him that how do you rectify a sin? How do you rectify stealing?
Whatever you do.
Right? So he said, how do you do it? You have to go and ask that person for forgiveness and return the stolen item. Well, he was in a quandary. He didn't know where he stole it from. Right? So that bothered him. And I always think about that. I'm like, that made an impression on me. But this is the way we do ask God for repentance. For things that we did to God, we talk to God. For things that we did to someone else, we have to talk to that person. And in fact, if you missed your opportunity during their lifetime, it says that you should go to their grave and ask for forgiveness. So I just share that. Any other questions? But Janet, thank you for adding.
I have just one quick follow-up.
Sure.
I recently had a conversation with Rabbi Norman Cohen, and I was asking him, what are the things that you should say, Shana Tova, Gama Tov, and then he says, here's another one, and it's Yiddish. I hope I can pronounce it right. Guten Kavittel, which means a do-over. Right? Right?
So a guten Kvittel, yeah, I think we say that though right on the eve of Yom Kippur.
Okay.
Which I always interpreted was, ask, that God should accept your pleas. But yeah, that's definitely said during this time. For any of the Yiddish speakers here, that might be some nostalgic phrases. A guten Kvittel. Any other questions or someone want to share something?
Yes, in accordance with part of what you were saying during your presentation, I have always had it instilled in me that whatever you do to observe is better than not doing it at all. If you keep kosher at home but eat out, if you say the blessings before the food, or whatever you might do, is one thing that you are doing positively and better than saying, I don't have to do anything.
I love that. That's 100% spot on. And I know that the statistics show that when you do something, it gets you inspired to do something else, right? When you do, and like you said, at home you might keep kosher. Outside it might be a different story, but while you're doing it, and that's important. Yeah.
Okay.
Can I ask a personal question?
Yeah, go for it, Ross.
I have a medical condition which doesn't allow me to eat hard things. I substitute applesauce for regular apple?
So first of all, the answer is of course. And if you want to know the reason why, there's nowhere that it says it has to be this way or another way. So the idea of apples, like we said, is very symbolic. So if you're having an apple sauce instead of a hard apple, good for you. And if you want to make sure you have it with honey, put a little honey on your applesauce. But the idea is it's not something that you have to worry about if you did it or didn't do it.
Thank you.
It'll put you in the spirit. It's a good reason to do it. Phyllis, did you have a question?
Yes, I'm curious. Since this is an unusual year as far as the holiday is going to become more home-centered than shul-centered.
Right.
If you had your own shofar, could you complete the mitzvah if you could blow it?
Yes. Yes. 100%.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I was
In
just
fact,
curious.
No, in fact, you raise a good point. I should have even mentioned that for any of you here who have your own shofar, if you can get your shofar to sound, you've already fulfilled the mitzvah. Of course, there are better and more correct ways to do it. But even hearing a sound of the shofar is listening to the shofar, right? So I'm going to just blow my shofar for a minute. Hopefully the speakers don't take feedback. There are different sounds that we make on the shofar. We make a long sound, which is a tekiah, right? We make a sound that is shorter, 3 shorter blasts. It's called shivarim. And then we have what's called a teruah, which is 9. And you don't have to count 9. The idea is it's short, short blasts. And that's like this. We do it in different sequences, right? Why are we doing it in different sequences? Because there were different opinions of how you should blow the shofar. In fact, something that's very interesting, until a certain point in time, you could go to one shul in the very same city and listen to them blow the shofar, and they would do it one way. And then you went to another shul in the very same city and they blew it a different way. Why was that? Because it says the shofar should sound like the cry of a child. Now, I have 3 children and they all cry differently. So can you imagine, like, well, okay, which way should it be? So but everyone was doing it similarly. They just had different customs until the rabbi said we need one custom throughout all of Judaism. And that's why we have a mixture of them all. So you always begin with the long blast and end with the long blast. The middle is what changes. The middle has 3 options. Just the short 3, just the long 9, the shorter 9, or a mix of them both, of 3 and the 9. So again, it is if you have a shofar and you cannot make it to service, definitely blow your shofar at home. Now, shofars can be not kosher. I don't know if you know that. When I say that, I don't mean a shofar that came from an animal that wasn't suitable to be a shofar, but shofars that have a crack in their shofar. No, and when I say crack, I don't mean like the design specs that are there from the natural animal, but I mean like a real crack. Maybe it fell and it splits. If a shofar has a crack in the midsection, it would almost always render it not kosher. It depends which way the crack is, and it has different rules. The reason for that is it changes the sound of the shofar. So if you have a beautiful decorative shofar, like with silver, if it goes beyond the lip of your shofar, it would mean that the sound changes, right? Because if I blow the shofar like this, and then I take my hand and sort of create a longer shofar, it's going to sound differently. I'm going to try it. I'm just covering with my hand, but the same thing would happen if I took a longer silver or some decorative addition. So again, the shofar can be blown at home, and you can do the mitzvah on your own. Great question.
I have to tell you that our oldest